Okay, today I'm here with James Capo. James is an accomplished landscape and wildlife photographer, as you will see. He is a full-time pastor in Arizona. He's been doing photography for a long time. He's doing a lot of wildlife photography. He got his degree in journalism, and from what I've seen is that people, and we can talk about this a little bit, James, but people that get their degree in some form of media do sort of make an easier transition over to they make it easier transition over to, you know, some of the photojournalism, photography, or stuff like that. And besides that, they all write very well. Jim has participated in a lot of local galleries. He's helped set up the galleries. He has a very active website, which we will see. And one of the things about his website, I think you will notice, not only besides the beautiful images that James has there, I think you'll also notice that they're very reasonably priced. These are images that you can buy off of James's website. He's got postcards and so forth, and we could talk a little bit about you know, what he's doing there and so forth. So I think we need a little history from James, and that's what we're going to go into now. We'll start talking about James, how did this all start? I mean, that's what people are really interested in that listen to the podcast or the vlogcast. I mean, how did this, where did you get interested in the digital age and the analog age? Where did it all happen?
Well, all the way back. I mean, I've been doing this since I was a kid with a little Brownie camera, first of all. And that was just, you know, a gift from parents when I was young. But what really kicked it off for me was two things. I have two older brothers. They're 8 and 9 years older than I am. And they got into photography, and they wanted to build a darkroom in our basement. And they looked at the little younger brother as a possible source of funds if I could contribute some of my allowance toward this. So they roped me into building a darkroom. And so, yeah, I was willing to, and certainly enjoyed it when we had it built. But the thing that got me was the first time that I ever took a piece of photo paper and exposed it. And I dropped it in the developing tray, and I watched this blank piece of white paper develop an image. And it was like magic. And I couldn't stop watching it, and I ended up watching it until it turned almost black. I didn't move it from the developing tray into the stop now quickly enough because I was so enthralled with it. But it was just an amazing thing to see, and so it kind of caught my attention. And then it wasn't long after that where we had a storm. We lived on the North Shore of Long Island at the time. We had a storm move across the Sound, the Long Island Sound. And I was watching it, and I was trying to take pictures of it, and I ended up taking a picture of a lightning bolt.
Oh, boy.
I mean, listen, for a 10, 11, 12-year-old, whatever I was, to be able to capture a picture of a lightning bolt in black and white on the little nothing camera that I had was like amazing. So that really piqued my interest, and I kind of kept up with it from there, and it's one of the things that led me into journalism. Getting my degree because I knew that I enjoyed photography and photojournalism appealed to me, and I knew I could write, and that just said, go to school for journalism. What else can you do with those two interests? So,
did you, you know, going back to your thing about the first image, it's amazing. And I've had people, international people on the podcast, and I had one young gal from Paris, and her dad was a German photographer, and hobby for him, and she went through the same scenario. So we cross the ocean, and we find out that photography has really done this for everybody, hasn't it? I mean, seeing that first image is what turns people on. So did you ever actually practice journalism? Did you work for a newspaper or anything like that?
Yeah, I did. Actually, I got through my theology degree, because after I got my journalism degree, I got my theology degree, and that's how I ended up in pastoral ministry. But while I was going to school for that, I was working actively in the field. And so I did it for a while. Yeah.
And so you saw the darkroom in, I don't know what year that was. Digital came in really, you correct me if
No,
I'm wrong, 97, 98, started making the transition.
I'm talking about early 70s.
Oh, you were, no, no, you were early 70s, but I was thinking about when we began to photographically make that
Right.
transition 97, 98. So were you doing photography all that time between 90s, between the 70s or mid 70s or whatever it was up until, when digital took over?
Well, life got in the way. Um, I had a family, I had work, and didn't have as much time. And I always kept it as a kind of a hobby. But it went latent for a fair bit of time. But then after the digital age came along and I got my first digital camera, it really reignited in a much bigger way the interest that I had much earlier.
Yeah, and I think that's happened with digital a lot. Although I have to confess, it is a confession, and I am talking to a pastor, so that's okay, right?
Feel free.
Yeah, but not a big confession. I moved back to film, and somewhat, not all the time, because you can't give up digit. But I just like the loud click of the shutter, and but I'm not going to do any dipping in the dark room and all that. But I guess once we have the passion, I think that's the important thing. It's hard to let that go, isn't it?
It really is, and it's an interesting thing that you say because digital and film they're different animals. Um, but I have a son. He's 21 now, and he's developed the photography bug as well, and he's worked as a journalist also, as a matter of fact. But I gave him my original film camera, and he loves working with film. He just enjoys it. I mean, he has digital, but there's something about film that he really enjoys.
Yeah, I think everybody thought when the digital age was ushered in back in the late 90s, early 2000s, as it eventually grew and the cameras got better, I think everybody thought film was going, it wasn't going to be around any longer. And I don't advocate one over the other. I think they're just different, modes of the same medium, or,
Yep.
just different ways to handle it. But it really never went away. And your son probably knows that a lot of different films are coming out now, and it's just a lot. It's almost not back to normal, or back to how it was. It never will be back there. But
Well, there's something about the craft of photography when you're working with film and an old manual camera and things like that. I mean, our cameras today do so much. The first time I ever had a camera that would focus for me, I thought, this is like cheating. You know, so there's something about the investment in crafting an image with an old film camera that isn't there in the same way in the digital age.
yeah,
But on the other hand, I do things with night photography. I love night photography that I never could do. That would just be impossible with the film medium. So it's different, and yet we're still out there capturing the amazing beauty of the natural world and all that's there, and being able to craft something special in that way is the same, whether you're talking film or digital.
absolutely, absolutely, and you really have excelled. And that's not hyperbolic. I mean, I really believe that you really, and I've seen some of your gallery work, and I've seen in whether it's wildlife or landscape, which I've seen on the website. And I think when people see this, they will agree that you fell in. Were you always a landscape and wildlife guy, or were you into the street at all, or?
When working in journalism, you have to be a little street photographer. It's just kind of the nature of the animal. But my interest was primarily, like when I was in college, I enjoyed nature and sports. I love to shoot sports. I love the action, being able to capture the peak of action and things like that. When I was no longer working in journalism, I didn't have as much opportunity shooting sports, but I've always held that interest in nature and wildlife and landscape.
Well, I think what we ought to do is take the viewers to that James Capo website, which will be, you'll get a link below and you can take a look at some of James's images. And I think you're going to find them extremely appealing. Hang in there, James.
All right, thank you.
Okay, where are we at here?
This is going to be a little embarrassing because I'm really bad about updating the site. I need to put on a lot
It's
more
going to
in.
be, no, it won't be embarrassing. You'll do fine. There we go. Okay. Can you see my screen, Babes?
Nope, not
Okay,
yet.
hang in there, hang in there. We're gonna share this baby. And there it is.
There you go.
Okay. Technology, we beat you this time. Okay. Here's James's website, which, as I said, I will link to. And what I'd like to do in particular, James, is go through the hummingbirds and maybe some of the nightscapes. Would that be okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, let's get to, because the hummingbirds are not easy to photograph. And I don't think James grabbed them and stuffed them and put them in these positions. So let's talk about your technique, number one, because when people see these images, they're going to say, well, how in the heck did he do this? I mean, what was his method? So why don't you take us through at least the first three images and talk about them a little bit, because they're really, I mean, they're beautiful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Different techniques for different types of shots. The first one, which is of the broad-billed hummingbird, was one that I was particularly happy with. But let me talk about the second one first.
Sure.
That's Anna's hummingbird there sitting on a dead rose petal. And that was taken after a rain in my backyard. And one of the times I was glad to be a negligent gardener when I didn't get out and clean up things very well, because this hummingbird came along and sat on top of this rose petal that had long since died, and was close enough for me to be able to snap that shot just from my camera, with my camera, without any additional lighting or anything else. And some of the specular highlights in the background were droplets that added that nice background effect to it, just thrown out.
Well, for the gear geeks, did you just have it wide open? Is that what when you were shooting? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely, because it was fairly close to the background, and if I had not been wide open and thrown that completely out of focus, it would have been terribly distracting.
Okay.
So,
and for the gear geeks too, what kind of camera would you have been using for the shot?
I believe at that time I was shooting with a Canon 80D.
Okay.
80D, not 8D.
Okay.
And with most likely a Tamron 150 to 600 millimeter lens.
Wow. Okay.
Not zoomed all the way out to 600 millimeters. I'm sure at that point in time I was closer than that.
Okay. How about that first photograph with the?
The first one, it was a setup. I have a hummingbird feeder that I hang right outside my kitchen window, so that I can be having breakfast, eating breakfast, or having a cup of coffee and looking out my window, and I can watch the hummingbirds come in. And when I have a hummingbird that has found the feeder that I particularly want to shoot, like this one, broad-billed, which wasn't common in my backyard at the time, I saw him come in and get a drink from the feeder, and I thought, I want to get him on film, but I don't want a picture of him at a feeder. I want him with a flower. So I replaced the feeder with a flower in the same location where the feeder was, and I put a nice plain background behind it instead of the brick wall that was actually there, the block wall, I should say, behind it, so that I would have a clean background. And I waited, and I was in my kitchen, having a cup of coffee, answering emails, and waiting for the bird to come back. And I had set up a couple of strobe lights, one on each side, about 45-degree angle, and then one on the camera as well, because it's the only way you can stop the wings of a hummingbird in motion like that, is when you're using a strobe. If you're just trying to use your shutter speed, you're almost always going to get some wing blur.
Okay.
Because they beat their wings at like 60 beats per second. And when you add that up, that's moving pretty fast. So even at 2,000th of a second, you'll still get blur.
And James, were the strobes, were you sitting in the kitchen, the camera's all set up, the strobes are upset, did you just push a trigger, or were you out there?
Exactly. I pre-focused on the flower where I expected the hummingbird to come, because he's looking for the hummingbird feeder. Didn't find the feeder, but decided to take the flower as well instead. And so I was all set up, pre-focused on it with a remote trigger, so that I didn't have to be looking through the camera. Okay. And when he came in, he was there for a few seconds. I shot off 5 images in that time, rapid fire, and that was all I got. And then he was gone.
Wow. You see, that's something we couldn't do back in the film days, that's for sure, right?
No, absolutely not.
No, absolutely not. And then, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Obviously, when I saw that, this image, I knew it was a winner, just the way it lined up and everything.
Oh, beautiful. I mean, the composition is beautiful, and the colors, the green background, and the red flowers, and it's and the third one, the pink flowers and the hummingbird coming to that, was that in your backyard also?
It was, same location and same type of a setup, actually. Hummingbirds don't typically sip nectar from an orchid. So this was a complete setup, but this is a Costas hummingbird. And when he was coming around, as he was very accustomed to coming around, I had other flowers that were more typical for hummingbird food. But I thought, I wonder if I can get them at this orchid. I think it'd be pretty. So I put the orchid out there, and I took a drop of hummingbird nectar, and I put a droplet of it right inside the orchid leaf. And it didn't take him too long, but he found it, and I was able to snap the shot.
So I think, to the listeners and the viewers, it takes a little bit of time to set these things up, but they're certainly possible. And just to promote James's stuff, somewhat. I mean, you can see that, the photographs that he's selling are not overly expensive. I think if you're looking for some great wall art, and a collection of hummingbird photos, this is one of the places you can go to.
I dare say, Jim, that they can become much more expensive. If you click through and actually order things, you can see that
by size and so forth.
By size, and if you want it framed and so on, they obviously go up in price considerably from what you see there. But that'll get people started anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Let's take a look at the eagles, because everybody loves eagles. Right?
No, indeed.
I mean, you can't not love an eagle. Anyway, let's talk about a little bit where these were shot. I do know, if I remember correctly, you were in Alaska there for a long trip, maybe a couple times. I don't know. But why don't you tell us a little bit about where you were in Alaska? What kind of equipment were you using? It was the same equipment that we just talked about earlier. And how long, were you here in this one spot? So just sort of a general overview.
Okay, what you see here were taken in several different locations, all in Alaska. I have a brother who lives in Anchorage. I go up and visit with him, stay with him, and then I go down, and there are some church members that live in Homer in the Kenai Peninsula. And so I'll visit with my brother, and I'll drive down the Kenai Peninsula to visit with the church members there. And so the first image that you see in the top left was actually across the Ketchimak Bay from Homer in a place called Sadie Cove. And I was with some friends that are salmon fishermen. We just went out in their boat just for a fun ride and to see if we could catch some pictures. And we were up in the cove, and this was an eagle that was up in the pine cones and pine tree, waiting for some fish, and we'd watch them take off once they saw some fish and dive after them. And so we were just in position, and the wind was kicking up, and it just flared his feathers from behind, and it gave him that almost shield of a feathers look. So that was the
Yeah,
first.
separated those feathers and gave it a lot more of a 3D effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a mountain that's behind him, just thrown out of focus.
So was that the same camera, the Canon 80D and the long?
No, this was with Canon 6D,
Okay.
just full frame.
Okay.
And same lens though, the Canon one or the Tamron 150 to 600 millimeter G2 model.
Now, these were the one that is, oh, it's phenomenal, is the Jousting Eagles. That's on that
Yes.
second row.
Yes.
How did you, how were you able to capture that? Were you a long time waiting for that shot?
The eagles are scavengers. They will certainly hunt themselves, but if there's easier catching off of a fishing boat or something like that, they'll go after it. I had rented a landing craft type of a boat that because of the way that you can lower down that one side on the landing craft, you can get inches off of the water. Typically in a boat, you're above that, and so if you're trying to catch them when they're scooping up a fish, you're shooting down on them. I didn't want to shoot down on them. I wanted to shoot level with them. So going out on a landing craft enabled me to get just inches off the water level. And there were fish scraps, and so the eagles were around going after fish scraps, and I would just focus roughly. And this is not with the same lens, by the way. This is with a 70 millimeter lens.
70, I'm sorry, 70 to what?
70 to 105. Might have been 105 millimeters or less.
Wow.
Because they would go from where the scraps were, and if the scraps were close to the boat, they'd be close. If I were shooting with a 600 millimeter, I'd get nothing. And I wanted to be wide enough to be able to catch them as they were coming in, and keeping them in focus. So this was with probably a 70 millimeter lens, maybe 105 at the most. And they were coming after fish scraps.
Wow.
And I just, like I said, I was laying down in the bottom of the landing craft, and most of the time you'd catch a single eagle coming in. This time, both of them saw the same thing and were both after it, and they were jostling each other on the way in. It's quite an experience to see.
Let's take a look at some of the landscape now, because that is something you're also well known for. I see you have some of the fire here in Arizona.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Okay.
That was quite the fire that we had, for sure.
Okay, so Sonoran Star Trails, but is this the one? Yeah, this is the one I was with you on, I think. Was this?
That's right.
No, it isn't. It's maybe we were there the same night. I'm not sure, but
yep, it was the same night.
Same night. Wow.
Yes, it was.
The Milky Way, Mount Lemmon. And I when I was out with you, I did notice that I think you don't use photo pills, you use Planet, that app. Is that correct?
There are two apps that I use. Planet Pro is one, PLAN, exclamation point IT, Planet. The other one is Photo Pills.
Photo pills, right. A lot of people use photo pills for these.
Yeah, both are excellent for planning night shots. They help you identify exactly where the Milky Way core is going to be, where the sun's coming up, where the moon will be, and in what phase. And so you can sit at home and do an awful lot of planning. So we knew when we went out there, because I had the app, what time the Milky Way would be rising and in what direction. And so about that time, looking to the east, it was rising in the southeast there, over the Hitchcock Pinnacle, which is that hoodoo that's lit up. And it just, it was one of those things that came up a little, I saw it before I expected to see it, actually. And then I said, oh, there it is. And I was able to snap the shot.
Yeah, the photo pills and the other app, but I do use photo pills. I mean, you can do a lot of armchair photographing and sort of figure a lot of things out. And it's beautiful. Hang in there. Let's get to something else here. Star Trails, hang in there. I want to take a look. Uh, you're doing a little urban photography here, I see, huh?
A little bit.
Oh, it says we don't. I want to close that preview. Yeah, is this? Where's this at?
That's the London Bridge.
Okay.
Not in London anymore. Of course, it's in Arizona now.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. You got this at night, and
Yeah.
wow. Okay. Let's take a look here. Let me get back to the wall art deal.
Looking for the
And
comet.
then, pardon?
I'm just wondering what it is you're looking for.
I see you've got
Yep.
Neowise. I was out there. I wasn't photographing, but here in Michigan, I was taking. It's a great shot. How did you plan this one?
This one really wasn't very planned. Of course, nobody knew Neowise existed until just days before it was photographable. So I heard about it, and I knew it was coming up in the morning at that time.
Right.
And so I said, well, I'd love to see if I can get a shot of this. So I didn't have any place scouted. I didn't really have it. You couldn't go to Planet Pro or Photo Pills to find out where the comet was going to be because they didn't have any information.
That's correct.
So I got up early one morning, and it was clear. And I said, okay, I'm going to see what I can find. And I drove, and the comet was as bright as a star, brighter than stars, actually, as you can see at that point in time. And I drove until I found a saguaro that would form a nice foreground and frame it nicely, and was able to get this shot about 4:20 in the morning, just as the sun was beginning to hit the lower part of the horizon and begin to get that glow.
That's a great capture. I know we saw Neowise here. Michigan doesn't have the the light pollution laws that we have in Arizona, but we saw ours late at night.
Well, I was so glad that I went out and grabbed this shot right away because a couple of days later it did start becoming visible in the evening as well, but we had cloud cover.
Okay.
So this was practically my only opportunity to grab it. So I was glad that I took it when I did.
Wow, great shot. I'm going to stop. That's okay. We're back. We're back again. Well, James, I want to thank you for coming on. I think the important thing that photographers, young photographers, old photographers, can learn by looking at your stuff. I mean, you're not doing anything that's so sophisticated that somebody else can't do. In other words, you plan the hummingbird shots, the hummingbird, you got two strobes out there and an electronic trigger, and you just set the thing up and you wait it, right?
Oh yeah. I call myself a lazy photographer because I just set it up and wait.
And you were having a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And on the, go back to the last one we saw, the Neowise. I have a friend of mine here who's an astronomer, so we went out. He planned the whole thing because he was sort of on top of his game. But I mean, you sort of went out, sort of randomly went out, and I think that's part of the passion of photography. And I think you got to have it in your soul. And you say, hey, I got to get up early, and I'm sure you did because you work a full-time job. And you went out and you captured Neowise, and that is really good. I'm gonna, as I said earlier, I'm gonna link your website to both the podcast and this. I think people ought to go in there, take a look at some absolutely beautiful wildlife and animal shots. James's prices are reasonable, obviously, as he said. If you go up bigger, obviously bigger is more expensive, but I could see that eagle, the two eagles on some corporate wall place, right? Because, the corporations like that, that sense of power, right? So you got these two great eagles. So, James, I really appreciate you being on, and, I'll get this YouTube video, I'll send it over to you and so forth, and the podcast, and can have your son and your kids take a look at it. And Dad was on, he's going live worldwide.
All right. Sounds great.
Okay, you
And,
take care,
I
pal.
promise I'll update the site with more images too.
There you go.